They built Cairo to challenge Baghdad. Within 2 centuries, Fatimid caliphs became prisoners inside their own palace walls, watching helplessly as their empire crumbled around them. This is how a dynasty destroys itself. 969. A Fatimid army stands at the gates of Fustat, Egypt's ancient capital. Their commander, Jafar al-Sakili, carries orders from Caliph al-Mu'izz, "Build me a city. Not just any city. Build me a rival to Baghdad itself." The Fatimids weren't content with ruling North Africa from Tunisia. They claimed descent from Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, making them the only legitimate caliphs in their eyes. The Abbasids in Baghdad were usurpers. Now, with Egypt conquered, they would prove it. Jafar began construction immediately. The new capital would be called Al-Qahira, the victorious. We know it as Cairo. But here's what the Fatimids never anticipated. The very walls they raised to project power would eventually become their prison. The dynasty that built one of history's greatest cities would watch its own extinction from those same palace windows. The Fatimids understood something profound about power. Architecture is propaganda in stone. Cairo wasn't built for defense. It was built for declaration. At its heart rose Al-Azhar Mosque, completed in 972, which became the Islamic world's greatest center of learning. The Fatimids were Ismaili Shia in a predominantly Sunni world. They needed to win hearts and minds, not just battles. So they made Cairo irresistible. Scholars flocked to Al-Azhar. Merchants filled the markets. The Fatimid court became legendary for its wealth, its libraries, its tolerance. Christians and Jews held government positions. If this is already changing how you see medieval Islam, drop a like. For nearly a century, the strategy worked brilliantly. Cairo grew to rival, perhaps surpass, Baghdad in splendor. But the Fatimids made one fatal mistake. They built an empire that required constant expansion to survive. Let me show you something most histories overlook. The Fatimid economy was a house of cards. Their wealth came from controlling trade routes between India and the Mediterranean. Gold flowed through Egypt, but not from Egypt. When that trade weakened, so did everything else. Now imagine your Caliph al-Mustansir, sitting on the throne in 1055. You've inherited the most magnificent court in the Islamic world. But the Nile hasn't flooded properly in 7 years. 7 years. Without those floods, there's no agriculture. Without agriculture, there's no food. Without food, there's no army loyalty. The Great Crisis, as historians call it, didn't just empty the treasury. It shattered the fundamental agreement between ruler and ruled. Soldiers went unpaid. Soldiers went hungry. And hungry soldiers start looking for someone else to serve. The empire that built Cairo was about to lose control of its own capital. Here's where the Fatimid story takes its darkest turn. To survive the crisis, al-Mustansir did something desperate. He sold everything. The legendary Fatimid treasury, accumulated over a century, was liquidated. Precious manuscripts went to foreign collectors. Jeweled swords were melted down. The caliph's own mother sold her jewelry. But it wasn't enough. The army fractured into competing factions. Turkish slave soldiers fought African slave soldiers in Cairo's streets. The city the Fatimids built to project power became a battlefield. For years, al-Mustansir couldn't leave his palace. Not because enemies waited outside, but because his own soldiers would rob him. Think about that. The commander of the faithful, descendant of the Prophet, hiding from his own guards. In 1074, salvation seemed to arrive. A general named Badr al-Jamali marched from Syria with loyal Armenian troops. He crushed the warring factions. Order returned. But the price of salvation was absolute power. But that's not even the worst part. Badr al-Jamali saved the Fatimid state. He also ended Fatimid power forever. Here's what nobody expected. The general who rescued Al-Mustansir took the title of vizier, chief minister. He also took control of the military, the treasury, and the administration. The caliph kept his throne. He kept his religious authority. But actual power? Gone. From 1074 onward, Fatimid caliphs were ceremonial figures. The dynasty that built Cairo to challenge Abbasid legitimacy had become a puppet show. And this is where I need you to understand something crucial. This wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. Subscribe if you want to see how this pattern repeats throughout history. The Fatimids had created a state too complex for one family to manage. Professional administrators took over because someone had to. The caliphs retreated deeper into their palace. Their world shrank to courtyards and ceremonies while real decisions happened elsewhere. For nearly a century, this strange arrangement continued. Viziers ruled. Caliphs prayed. Cairo flourished, in a way, under professional management. But the Fatimid claim to legitimacy was religious. They were supposed to be divinely guided leaders. How long can a divine dynasty survive when everyone knows it's powerless? The answer came in 1169. Egypt faced invasion from Crusader armies. The Fatimid vizier, desperate for help, invited a Syrian general named Shirkuh to assist. Shirkuh brought his nephew, a young commander named Salah ad-Din. You know him as Saladin. Drop your prediction in the comments. Did the Fatimids realize they'd invited their own executioner? When Shirkuh died just months later, Saladin became vizier. A Sunni general now controlled the Shia Caliphate. The last Fatimid caliph, Al-Adid, was 20 years old. He would never see 21. 1171. Al-Adid lay dying, possibly from illness, possibly from poison. History isn't certain. What is certain is what happened next. Saladin ordered the Friday sermon changed. Instead of praying for the Fatimid caliph, Egyptian mosques would now pray for the Abbasid caliph in Baghdad. 2 centuries of Fatimid religious authority, erased in a single afternoon. And here's the part that answers everything. There was no uprising. No resistance. The Ismaili dynasty that built Cairo to challenge Baghdad, that made Egypt the center of an alternative Islamic world, that produced some of history's greatest libraries and scholars, that dynasty ended with barely a whisper. Why? Because by 1171, the Fatimids had been palace ghosts for a century. The population barely noticed the change. The empire had hollowed itself out from within those magnificent walls. Saladin didn't conquer the Fatimids. He simply closed an empty box. Cairo survived the Fatimids. It thrived under Saladin and his successors. Al-Azhar stands today, 1,000 years after its founding. The walls the Fatimids built still mark parts of the old city. But the dynasty that created all of it vanished so completely that most people have never heard their name. That's the real lesson here. The Fatimids didn't fall to invasion or rebellion. They retreated from power into ceremony, from rule into ritual, until there was nothing left but a title.